You fall out, no one answers. Everything feels wrong. You tell yourself it's fine, but deep down, you know that's false. There's no one around. Then you come to the realization that you're truly alone. Horror doesn't always need to be about blood and monsters. Sometimes it seeps in through the absence, the lack of connection, the lack of voices, and the unbearable stillness of being alone. The kind of isolation that makes you wonder if the world around you still exists. There's a strange cruelty about loneliness. It makes the familiar feel haunted, even when it isn't. Your own heartbeat feels foreign, like it belongs to someone else. Mother Teresa once said, "The most terrible poverty is loneliness, and the feeling of being unloved." In horror, this idea takes a terrifying form. Loneliness isn't just emotional, it's existential. In a way, it strips away meaning. It leaves you stranded in a world that continues turning without you. It isn't the darkness we fear, but the thought of being forgotten, that no one will notice when we are gone. Isolation is more than just being alone. It's realizing that there may be no one left out to reach out to you. This is where horror begins. Not in the monster, but in the silence before it. Before we begin, let's begin where isolation truly starts, within ourselves, within our brain. Fear doesn't always start with sight and sound. It begins with interpretation, within the gray matter within our skulls, primarily in our amygdala, the brain's fear center. Did I just see something in the corner of my eye? Where was that groan coming from? Was that door always opened? All these questions pass through our brains, and we start wondering, am I truly safe? When we are isolated, those type of questions never stop repeating. The amygdala begins operating in a state of hypervigilance. The mind starts working in overdrive, trying to keep you sane. It's not malfunctioning, it's just overperforming, searching for meaning. Horror games utilize that tendency. Games like Silent Hill thrive on ambiguity. Is what you're seeing truly real? Or is it just your imagination? Fatal Frame forces the player to peer through the camera obscura, never truly sure if what they're seeing is truly there. These games aren't just frightening because what they show, because they force the player's brain to complete the image. In isolation, the body's alarm never turns off. Its instincts to keep us safe and ensure survival are pushed to their limits. That hypervigilance, a survival mechanism, becomes self-destructive. For example, you start feeling watched, even when you're alone. The mind itself becomes a threat, and in turn, one of the most intimate forms of betrayal. Every horror story begins intimately in a place we trust. For example, a bedroom, a school, or even a hospital. These spaces should be seen as places of comfort until something inside them changes. The environment starts becoming something alien. Things we saw as familiar are no longer that way. It's not the enemies that strike first, it's the betrayal of something familiar. Places you once thought safe become a stage for unease. That save room is a temporary sanctuary because eventually you'll have to leave it. Being isolated turns the world you once knew and corrupts it. The home becomes a maze. The streets feel longer than you remember. You realize that the places that were once familiar are not haunted by ghosts, but by absence. Setting stops serving the story and starts telling it. It becomes more than a backdrop. It shows you what fear looks like when it has nowhere left to hide. Horror thrives when the player begins to doubt not only the monster, but the ground they're standing on. It's as if the world has turned against us when we're isolated. The human brain thrives on connection, voices, laughter, even hearing someone else talking. These show you that a world exists outside your own thoughts. But once we remove that proof, our mind starts to fabricate things to fill in the void. It begins subtly, but worsens over time. For example, that shadow in the distance could be a person, or the howling wind could be voices. Situations like this start chipping away at your certainty. Was it real? Did I imagine it? Or am I slowly losing my grasp on the world? Isolation doesn't only amplify fear, it personalizes it. The longer you stay isolated, the more you start questioning your own memory. Objects appear differently from what you remember. Familiar spaces begin feeling alien. Your mind feels as if it's conspiring against you. Your memory and perception begin to fracture. But this isn't the only threat. Time and sequence of events blur. Minutes feel like hours. The lines of what actually occurred and what is imagined begin to dissolve. Your own senses turn into sources of doubt. Horror games exploit this with environmental cues, usually events that contradict memory. The player starts questioning everything around them. The environment becomes a reflection of the mind under duress, unstable, unreliable, and unsettling. Ultimately, the fear from this distortion becomes personal. This isn't just about an external threat, it's about doubting your own mind. In isolation, your brain can become a maze of uncertainty, where remembered detail can become a trap, and even perception can be false. Isolation doesn't just distort perception, it strips away control. When you're alone, every decision feels heavier, and actions carry consequences. Helplessness is the psychological weight of knowing that no one can intervene, guide, or validate your actions. Even minor tasks, locking a door, checking a corner, or prepping for a threat become a catalyst for anxiety. Limited resources can intensify this effect, because in isolation, scarcity is more than practical, it's psychological. Resources, ammo, health items, or means of escape become symbols of security. Losing access to them amplifies fear because it is a reminder that survival depends on you. Your ability to act under these circumstances may not be enough. In horror, this is often represented by broken doors, broken equipment, and blocked pathways. The environment, in a sense, enforces helplessness by forcing the player to rely on limited options and amplifying stress on the mind. The mind, if left unchecked, begins to invent threats or exaggerates a minor one. Something just darted past the window? What was it? Was it a threat, or am I just hallucinating under stress? This uncertainty fuels your helplessness. Helplessness doesn't need a monster. It exists between what is possible and what feels uncontrollable. Even routine things start feeling like a burden. Do you move forward, hide, or retreat? Each choice is weighed down with imagined consequences that may or may not exist. The human mind isn't built for silence. It's built for noise, for laughter, conversation, and companionship. When that disappears, the mind starts to panic. For example, you can potentially start to replay memories in your head just to feel someone's presence again. You start talking to yourself to fill in the quiet, but the longer the silence stretches out, the louder the thoughts become. They start taking a life of their own. When isolation lingers, the brain begins acting up. It begins searching for connections in places it shouldn't, shadows, whispers, or the faint creak of a floorboard. You start to hear things that aren't there. Sometimes they even appear. You're not going crazy just yet. It's your brain's way of trying to protect you from being alone. In a sense, it creates company. It gives silence a face. Over time, that company becomes harder to separate from reality. You start to distrust what you remember. Was that voice that you're hearing truly yours to begin with? That's the danger of isolation. It convinces you that the only person left might not be real. In horror, this is where the fear turns inward. It might not be the monster on the outside that is the threat. It can be the voice that's inside your head. Those internal companions are both the protector and the executioner, offering both comfort and condemnation. And the worst part? They sound like you. Loneliness doesn't just come from the mind. It can come from spaces around us. Homes, schools, hospitals. These are places built for connection. But when you take away that connection, something changes. You start to feel the absence of people and begin to feel the consequences of being alone. Horror understands this intimately. It knows that being alone carries weight. A car left abandoned in the middle of the road, an abandoned shop that shows recent signs of life, a door that was there but no longer is. All of this reminds us that at one point, life was there, and now there isn't. This fuels the sense of loneliness. That's where fear roots itself, in the realization that something that was alive has died. You, as the player, begin to feel the true weight of loneliness and isolation, that no matter how much you look, there is no one there for you. The Pizzaplex in Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach ruin mirrors this decay. The once vibrant Pizzaplex lay in ruin and charred. It once gave off the vibe of being alive, but now it feels dead. Every broken attraction, every charred part of the scenery, and the feral remains of the glam rock animatronics are a reminder of control lost. Horror thrives in the places between purpose and ruin. When the world stops working the way it's supposed to, you start to feel how fragile your safety is. And at the end of it all, you're reminded that you're truly alone. Isolation rarely announces itself. It seeps in, slowly. Everything feels quiet, like the noise of the world is fading, but the silence has weight behind it. And when it settles for too long, it begins to press down on the mind. You start to notice things that are always there but never felt significant. Perhaps you notice some mundane detail, such as a hole in the ceiling that you could swear was never there before. The game world begins to feel smaller. This is where the horror begins, not in the monster or violence, but in recognition, such as the voice in your head beginning to sound foreign. The mind starts filling in the gaps left behind by others. You imagine things that aren't there because you can't bear the emptiness. You begin wondering if your memories are reliable or if loneliness has changed them. The more you remain alone, the more your sense of identity unravels. Your sense of self starts to deteriorate until you're a shadow of your former self. You then realize that you were never truly running away from an external threat, but from yourself. Even when you're isolated, there's always some sense of humanity that remains. Something that shows remnants of a human presence. A reminder that at one point, something was alive. Whether it be an abandoned park, a store of electricity still running through it, or street lights that remain active. In these moments, you realize that isolation isn't just about being alone. It's being aware of what once was, of what others experienced, and feeling the weight of absence. Using Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach as an example, the Pizzaplex is a massive structure that brought numerous guests to see the attractions. You can see the remnants of the activities that occurred in the structure, whether it be concerts, driving at Roxy Raceway, or just having a pizza at numerous restaurants. The more signs of life that you encounter, the more isolated you start to feel. There was something there at one point, but now it's gone. Time, when you're isolated and alone, behaves differently. You start to lose your grasp on the world. It feels like time is never consistent. What feels like an hour might only be minutes passing by, and vice versa. In horror, the distortion of time is cruel. You are in the moment, alert, and aware. The longer you remain isolated, the more it eats away at your sense of self. The game, or the story stops needing to scare you what lurks behind the door. Instead, it makes you wonder how long it's been since that door was last opened. There's a point where the loss of time becomes a loss of self. Without markers, sunrise, sunset, and the passing noise of the world, you feel like you're in limbo. You exist, but you're not aware of how long you've been doing so. The longer isolation lasts, the more your memory begins to wear down. You begin forgetting small details. Where have you been? What you've seen, and even who you are. Mind tries to restore order, but it becomes harder the more time goes by. And eventually, the terrifying realization comes to fruition. Maybe time hasn't stopped at all. Maybe it's you come to terms with the fact that you're truly isolated. The world continues to move on, while you remain trapped in a moment that refuses to pass. When isolation lasts too long, something changes. Our mind begins edging toward the breaking point, the point of no return. We stop expecting rescue. We stop looking for any source of life. It's as if we've finally given up. We've succumbed to the isolation. Horror often plays with this transition. It shows when someone stops fighting isolation and starts living with it. The mind that was once overwhelmed with solitude begins to rely on it. It bends reality in ways to make sense of things, such as doing drastic things in order to fill the void left by a loved one. At that point, the distinction between sanity and survival blurs. Things that you never do before become routine. Even things that aren't real are put into question because part of you still wants to believe them. Because it's easier to talk to a voice that doesn't exist than face the truth that no one will ever answer. This is what makes madness and isolation truly unsettling. It doesn't shout or break. It grows slowly in the spaces that no one can reach. And before you realize it, the silence you feared has become the only thing keeping you grounded. When people talk about the Minotaur, they usually focus on the monster. It's more than that. The myth isn't about the creature at the center. It's about the maze around it. The place designed to confuse, isolate, and wear someone down before they ever face the creature itself. The labyrinth is a metaphor for the kind of isolation that horror leans into. It's not about the physical structure. It represents the erosion of direction, control, and uncertainty. When you're trapped in something like that, the walls become just as dangerous as whatever lies at the end of it. Everything feels wrong. Things start looking the same, and time drags on. There's no sense of progress. That's where the dread really comes from. Not the Minotaur itself, but knowing that the environment is designed to keep you alone. If you take the myth at face value, the Minotaur is the final threat. But looking at the myth from a different perspective, the monster is almost secondary. The exhaustion, frustration, and loneliness are what impact you the most before you even encounter the creature. The danger isn't just the monster itself. It's the world that made sure you'd be alone if and when you finally reach it. That's why the myth translates so well into horror, not because of the Minotaur, because the environment itself shapes the fear. It traps you, confuses you, it forces you deeper inside. The labyrinth is the part that sticks with you. The idea of being surrounded by walls that don't care whether or not you make it out. Isolation doesn't need fangs. Sometimes, it just needs a place that refuses to answer back. Fenrir's story is usually told as a warning about a monster destined to break free and end the world. But if you look at it from a different angle, the myth isn't about destruction, it's about restraint. Something so powerful that is bound, chained, trapped, and isolated from the rest of the world. That's the part of the myth that echoes with isolation. Not when the chain finally breaks, but everything leading up to it. The slow build of tension, the idea that the danger is present but held back, just outside your reach. It's the kind of dread that doesn't show itself directly, but it's always in the back of your mind. There is another layer of the story. Fenrir wasn't just locked away, he was abandoned. That sense of abandonment, of realizing that no one is coming back for you, is its own form of horror. This mirrors how isolation strips away your sense of belonging. The world keeps turning, and you're left alone on the outside of it, unheard and unseen. That's why this myth fits in the discussion of isolation. Fenrir isn't just a monster. He's a reminder of something that is cut off from the rest of the world. The world keeps on turning while he remains isolated and alone. This echoes the player within the game world. You're chained and bound by invisible shackles until you make your escape. In Japanese folklore, there are tales of spirits that linger among the living. For starters, a yurei is a general term for a ghost, a soul that simply didn't finish its story and lingers alone. They remain in this world, isolated from the living and unable to move on. There is loneliness in this scenario, a spirit that is trapped between places, unable to rejoin the living or move on to whatever comes next. Onryo are usually what people talk about, the vengeful spirits, the ones driven by grudges, anger, or betrayal. But there is more to this than just rage. Their rage can be rooted in something simpler, abandonment, a life cut too short, a moment where help never came, or someone they trusted turning their back on them. Both Yurei and Onryo share the same foundation, a soul left behind. Yurei linger because they can't reconnect, and Onryo lash out because the connection was stolen from them. They exist in spaces that people leave behind, empty rooms, abandoned areas, and the quiet places meant to hold memories. When players encounter these beings in horror games, it resonates on a deeper level than a simple fight. It mirrors a truth that we don't like to acknowledge, that isolation can haunt just as powerfully as a ghost. And sometimes, the scariest thing isn't the ghost itself, but what it represents. The fear of being left alone long enough to become one. Case Study 1, Resident Evil 4, Original and Remake. Two versions of the same story, but two different versions of isolation. Resident Evil 4 is interesting because on paper, Leon isn't alone. He's sent on a mission, he has support, he communicates with people, and he has Ashley and Ada. Yet both the original and the remake make him feel isolated, just in different ways. In the original game, Leon's isolation comes from separation, not emotional separation, but literal, physical distance. The entire environment, from the village and finally to the island section, is open, almost spacious, but none of it feels like it belongs to him. Enemies appear in numbers and serve as obstacles. Even his moments of communication, such as with Hunnigan, feel like lifelines tossed in a hostile ocean. They give you information, but no sense of presence. The game's design reinforces this distance. The fixed aiming, the limited movement, the tight over-the-shoulder perspective, they keep the player anchored to the idea that Leon only has himself to rely on. You're equipped, but not supported. Leon in the original Resident Evil 4 doesn't internalize isolation, he tolerates it. He keeps his personality intact, because that's the only real armor he has. Resident Evil 4 Remake takes a different approach. Leon is still physically isolated, but now the game digs deeper into why isolation matters. The remake brings his past with him, the weight of Raccoon City, the mental exhaustion he hides, and the fear of failing again. All this shapes how isolation functions in this version. Threats feel closer, the game world feels more suffocating, and Leon's silence carries more weight than his one-liners. Here, isolation becomes more emotional. This game gives the sense that Leon is still haunted by his memories. The remake lets players feel that heaviness without spelling it out. His interactions with others feel brief and functional, but it gives the impression that he has built walls around himself, as if he's afraid of what happens when they fall. Both versions of Resident Evil 4 give two different perspectives of being alone. They highlight how isolation shapes survival. The original gives off the vibe that you're cut off and no one is coming, while the remake gives off the vibe that even if someone comes, you're not sure you can reach back. Both games show that being in a horror setting isn't just about the environment, it's about what the environment pulls out of the character, whether it's resilience, pressure, or parts of themselves they don't want to face. Case Study 2, Silent Hill F. Silent Hill F handles isolation differently from most games in the series. Instead of starting with the town turning itself empty, the story begins with a girl who's already emotionally damaged. Hinako's isolation isn't sudden, it's a state that she's been surviving long before the events of the game. Hinako's world is built around exclusion. She isn't just isolated, she's pushed out of every social space that she tries to exist in. She is bullied, talked over, treated like someone who's already failed at being part of a group, and she internalizes that. Her isolation becomes something that she accepts rather than fights. That's the starting point. She comes from a broken family, with her only solace being her sister. Even in her friend group, she feels somewhat alienated. Hinako's isolation makes her feel vulnerable to anything that offers attention, even if that attention is dangerous. As the horror escalates, Hinako becomes trapped inside of herself more than her town itself. Her companions start to disappear slowly, barely any guidance, nothing to pull her back. Everything she's been carrying, loneliness, resentment, and exhaustion, become the last place she can hide. Floral infection doesn't isolate her, it amplifies the state she's already living in. Silent Hill F uses isolation in a way that feels smaller and personal. It shows how the absence of connection can reshape someone else's sense of self before the supernatural. Hinako's story is a reminder that isolation doesn't always start with an empty street. Sometimes it starts with a person with no one to stand beside them. Case Study 3, Five Nights at Freddy's, Security Breach, Ruin. Ruin does something subtle the longer you stay in the Pizzaplex. It takes a structure that was designed to be loud, vibrant, and welcoming, and lets you move through it in a dilapidated state. The Pizzaplex in the base game had a certain vibe. Even though Gregory's adventure took place after closing time, it still felt busy, lights everywhere, music constantly playing, and animatronics popping up every few minutes. The place never lets you feel alone. Ruin turns all that off. Cassie enters, thinking she's rescuing her friend. That's her only anchor when she steps into the wreckage of the Pizzaplex. There is no music, no attractions, and no signs of life, just the wreckage. That's where the isolation starts setting in. She has to trust a voice that she cannot see. The sad part is, she must continue because she has to believe Gregory is speaking to her. Ruin is haunting for the player as well. Is it really Gregory? Is he okay? Is he even reachable? The more Cassie depends on that voice, the more isolated she starts to feel. Then comes the ultimate betrayal. In the end, when Gregory thanks her for coming to save him, he ends up betraying her. What makes Ruin's isolation so different is that the setting used to be alive. It wasn't a haunted town or some rural part of Europe. It was something that died. You feel that loss. The Pizzaplex doesn't just feel empty. It feels like it remembers what it used to be and can't get back there. Isolation isn't just about being physically alone. It shapes the way a character thinks, reacts, and feels. In both versions of Resident Evil 4, Leon moves from a rural village to a sprawling castle and finally an island stronghold. Each location tests his isolation differently. The village leaves him socially cut off. The castle gives a sense of claustrophobic solitude, and the island gives a sense of being disconnected from the outside world. The myth of the Minotaur and the Labyrinth mirror this progression. The Labyrinth reflects the way the environment itself becomes an active agent of isolation, while the lurking Minotaur parallels the ever-present threat waiting just outside Leon's sight. In Silent Hill F, isolation is more personal. Hinako's experiences show how solitude interacts with vulnerability. Her limited connections, broken family dynamics, and rural setting intensify the feeling of being unseen and unheard. Here, the Yurei myth ties in. They are trapped between worlds, and Hinako is caught between the boundaries of her mind and the surrounding society. Isolation isn't just external, it's deeply internal. Finally, in Security Breach Ruin, Cassie's journey through the destroyed Pizzaplex strips away the illusion of safety and companionship. The charred remains of the Pizzaplex emphasize abandonment. Once vibrant, it now mirrors Fenrir's restrained power. Danger is present, but delayed. Throughout this narrative, we've learned that isolation forces characters and players alike to confront absence. The absence of certainty, safety, and witnesses. Isolation is the monster that never sleeps. It doesn't roar or chase. It waits in the quiet, shapes the mind, and stretches time. It lingers in the abandoned spaces, the broken homes, the haunted memories, and the shadow of once vibrant places. In horror, it is the absence that terrifies, the emptiness that lingers, and the silence that answers no call. No one is left to hear you, and that, above all, is the horror of truly being alone. And so, we must ask, when the world moves on and leaves you behind, what does it truly mean to survive?